Welcome everybody. Ich höre mich selbst. To our event about climate communication do's and don'ts.
I'm very happy that we to announce our guest, Karel Mohn from klimafakten.de, and they're dealing with how to talk about the climate crisis and how we can communicate facts about climate crisis, so that you can get people to act. So I will give the floor to Karel now. You can ask your questions via the YouTube chat, and you can also use the tweet bag that is linked.
Thank you, Jona. Thank you to everybody who's working in the background with all the technology and who are interpreting today. And thank you to all of you who are listening and sitting in front of your screens. I'm very excited that this has a special connection with the University of Dortmund, because I can remember the summer camp of Fridays for Future that was 2 years ago in Dortmund. And I was there for 3 days, and I thought it was really inspiring and impressive. And so I have very good images in my head, even now that when we're sitting in front of our screens nowadays. So I will now share my screen with you. And I would like to talk to you about 10 theses about climate communication. Facts are important, but they do not make policies. And before I start with my 10 theses, we would like to get a little closer to the subject as a whole. And we will start with a few questions. Maybe this up front, if you have any questions or comments, or if you don't understand anything or think something's weird or a topic for discussion, you can use the chat. We talked about that the hosts will definitely keep a look at the chat and that they will notify me or stop me when there are any questions. And so I think that at the end of my presentation, we will have enough time to talk about everything that needs to be discussed. So at the latest at 3:30. To start, I would like to show you a picture. Normally, when we are in a smaller group, I always ask the audience, what do you see here? What's this picture showing? And what is happening in this image? Many people are a little shy and timid with their answers, and they don't really want to say what's in their head when they see this image. And so I will jump ahead to my interpretation of this image and to what is shown here. You can see a woman who has just been given a cancer diagnosis. And this is a conversation between a patient and a doctor, probably, who are talking about the existential topic of a cancer disease. And I included this picture because this is a difficult scene that touches you and that makes you think. And climate change, climate crisis, that's the same thing with that topic as well. That also moves us and touches us, and it's an existential topic for us. So at this point, I want to say, just like doctors who prepare for conversations about deadly diseases like cancer, we also have to professionally and prepare ourselves for conversations about climate change and climate protection, climate policy. And this is what my talk is about today. And to start on a more positive note, I would like to have a look at some studies. Climate communication. You are really talking about conversation. And we want to if we want to put this on a political level, we have to start with everyday conversation. These conversations that you have every day with your friends, family, colleagues, acquaintances, these conversations, they make policies. It's not just lightly said, but there are real studies about that that confirm this correlation. And this is really great. This study here by the University of Hamburg, they looked at the situation in Germany regarding conversation about climate change. And you can see here with the red and the green bars the number of people who talk to people, to family or friends about climate change at least once a week. And that this has changed a lot. This has increased a lot in the big year 2019 of Fridays for Future. And the people who are not talking about it, this number has gone down. That's very good. And it doesn't really matter what they're talking about. What's important is just the fact that these conversations are happening. So now I would like to take you with me into this talk. So I have two questions for you at the beginning. And I would like to ask you to just write down your answers into the chat, and so that the hosts can give me your answers, hopefully. And I would like you to think about everyday behavior of most people in our society and its consequences for the climate. So everyday behavior, like the decisions we make when we consume, how do we live, how mobile are we, and what is decisive for the decisions we make for our behavior. Do they decide for or against a car? Do they travel by plane? What do you think are the motives of people when they try to decide these questions? I can't see anything but myself in my presentation right now, but I hope that there are answers in the chat, or that they will come soon, and that Jona or Luisa will tell me whether there are answers or not. Yes, we have some answers, some commentary. One motive would be the comfort or the ego that's important here. And there is also the motive of costs, money, prestige, and comfort, work, ignorancy, freedom, money that is available to you, wishes. Yeah, that's fascinating. Those are good answers, and I think they're all right. And now I have a second question for you. And now it's coming closer to you yourself. Think about your own everyday behavior and its consequences for the climate. And what motives are decisive for your own behavior? What do you think? Why are you doing what you do? You can also write this down into the chat. What's your point of orientation when you're trying to decide what you do? Mostly, people say that their friends are important and their availability, morals, hobbies, how to finance your life, and your social group. Yeah, thank you. And now let's look at these answers together. So I will summarize the first question What do we think about other people? We had answers like comfort. They think about money and costs, about the work it takes to live climate friendly. We have words like prestige or egoistical behavior and freedom or restriction of freedom. And if I summarize this, those are all legitimate factors, but maybe not the most the best factors. Especially when I think about how much work it takes. And the second question has interesting answers because there are factors that didn't come with the first question. You will also think about morals when you think about your own behavior. What do you think is when you think about what's really important and good? And I hope that nobody now feels tricked by me with these two questions, because it might seem like they were a trap, those questions. But I asked these questions before in another workshop and I got the same answers. And the point of these answers that I think is interesting is that on average we think that our fellow human beings are not as positive, acting in a positive way as we are, and that when we think about ourselves, we think about morals and a good life, our imagination of a good life, and that it's more positively oriented. And I would like you to think about this. This is an interesting difference, and maybe you can see that this doesn't really work out if everyone thinks I'm doing things because some things are important to me. But on the other hand, we always think that other people aren't doing that. Something's not right there. And so I am at my first thesis. And something about my website, klimafakten.de, climatefacts.de. Why am I here and why am I talking about this topic? How are we organized? We are a not-for-profit limited company, and we get our money from two foundations, the Stiftung Mercator and European Climate Foundation, who are also our shareholders, who own this limited company. And our name, Climate Facts, Klimafakten, tells you what we want. We want a debate about climate protection on the basis of facts. And we found our topic of climate communication rather by chance, because we saw that facts are often ignored and they often don't convince people. So we thought about that, and we thought about how do people think about and talk about this topic and what's happening in their heads. And we wanted to help understand what's happening in the debate about climate and why is it so difficult, why is it so passionate, and sometimes done in a destructive way. And we especially would like to help people who are activists and support them to communicate effectively so that people can be active for climate protection. And now my first thesis is in connection with the first questions. We should trust ourselves and our fellow human beings to do the best. I want to say, and this is what the questions earlier confirmed, that in the political debate we are on a kind of a carousel of missing confidence in the other side. And this negative carousel looks, for example, like citizens who don't have confidence in politicians. People say that politicians are too timid and faint-hearted, and they don't really want to do anything. They don't dare do anything. And on the other side, the politicians don't have any confidence in citizens. And they say that those goals are too ambitious and that then there will be yellow vest protests like in France. So the other side doesn't have any confidence in the other side, even though there's a lot to do. And I think we should get off this carousel. There are good empirical reasons for that too, because all of the political parties, you can see this going through all of the political parties, even FDP and AfD. People say that climate change is one of their top 3 priorities. So they say that we should do everything to stop climate change. And now the second thesis, which is restricting this a little bit, do not trust in the power of facts. Or I would phrase it differently, facts should not be overvalued. The Eckhard von Hirschhausen, a philosopher, said that research shows that showing people research does not work. So you can tell people about scientific facts, but this will not sway them and will not convince them to do something for climate protection. And why is that? It's because people tend to have specific psychological mechanisms, motivated reasoning, for example, and the avoidance of cognitive dissonance. And those are basic anthropological equipments. People just are like that. So they think that the ideologists are always the others who think in short ways, but we are all prone to do this. And we're always looking for facts so that they suit us, so that they suit what we are and how we look at the world. And this is because we want to avoid cognitive dissonance. So when we say we value the protection of natural resources, we do not look at things that maybe are in contrast to this. And then we have arguments like that maybe driving a car isn't as destructive or damaging, and that other means of public transport also do damage. So this is the avoidance of cognitive dissonance. And you can say that when facts and values get into conflict with each other, facts will lose. And the same is true for the fight between facts versus identity or self-image, being part of a group, facts versus experiences, emotions, or social norms. It's almost always the case that facts have the weaker position there, and that they can't really win. But still, facts are very important, and it's important to work with facts. They can't do much on their own, but missing knowledge can still do a lot of damage. I took part in a round of conversations with normal people the other day. They asked about climate. What do you know about it? Yeah, climate change. They have a big problem with plastic waste. And when I go into the supermarket and see all the packaging, that's what people say. And at the same time, that's wrong, because plastic waste is not the climate problem number 1. I think it's important that we know what we have to do to reduce emissions. For example, energy coming from buildings, traveling by plane, that we have to stop eating meat. When we think about what the consumer can do, those are the important levers for the consumer, but not plastic waste. Of course, misinformation can also do damage. For example, about e-cars, that they have a bigger impact on the environment than combustion motors. That's also wrong, but it's often suggested. And then there's disinformation, or disinformation campaigns. I would like to remind you about a group of pneumologists who a couple of years ago in Germany said that particulate matter or nitrogen is not really damaging, which was wrong. It was debunked later. But still, people talked about that, even on German talk shows.
And when you're active in climate protection, you might often hear when you say, I'm all for climate protection, the things that are written in the yellow section of this slide. Something like that other people are also for climate protection, but that we need strategies open to different technologies, that we must not risk a social divide, and many other arguments why climate protection is great, but doesn't work that way. And what happens here? I would say that those are discourses of delay, and they don't lead to climate protection, but they lead to inactivism. And I think it's important to say here that vaccination is important, because what you can do when you encounter disinformation campaigns, that you give people examples of how disinformation works. Like for the immune system, you give a small doses and then your immune system learns how to deal with it. And that's a really effective strategy also for disinformation. And for that, we have this information paper, which we call PLURF, with starting with the first letters of the strategies. So it's an acronym. So pseudo-experts, logical mistakes, expectations that cannot be met, cherry picking, and conspiracy theories in English. And there are a lot of those in the climate debate. And it's really good and helpful when you've understood how disinformation works, because you can react better that way. And we have done the same with another information poster, which is also available as an interactive quiz on our website about discourses of delay. And this is also about knowing beforehand how it is constructed to be able to react better to it. So now my third thesis. And I'm looking at a black screen of the moderators. Are there any comments, questions right now that we should address right now? Yes, there's one question. We just heard about trusting people more, and how can you meet other people and show them that you, or tell them that you have the same opinion. I think you should just do that. If you have a feeling that there is a common ground, then that's a good thing. I think that's a really good conversation strategy, in my opinion, to see where and how am I connected to the person I'm talking to. Because it could be the case, for example, if I'm talking to someone who says, well, we need more innovations, that's the key for the future. In my opinion, that's not really true. But if this person tells me about what great experience he or she had in nature, and I think that's a good basis to talk about the things that connect the people. And I think that's really fitting to my third thesis, which is ask yourself, what do I want from the person I'm talking to? And I think the question is good, what connects us? because I believe before our inner eye, we have a completely different image of what it is about when we talk about climate change and climate protection. And I think this image looks rather like this. Here, this picture is 450 years old. It is by Peter Bruegel. Conversion of Paul is the name, and that's a story of the Bible. You maybe know the story of the transformation from Saulus to Paulus. And the story is that Saulus was a Roman inquisitor, and he tortured Romans, and he was on his way to Damascus. When he was blinded, he couldn't see any longer, and then God appeared, and God told him that what he was doing is wrong. And so Saulus was converted to Paul and became a missionary and became so it's not about religion, but about the conversion moment. That we should only have to find the best arguments to defeat our partner that we're talking to, so that he will say, "Oh, thank you that you told me that, and now I believe the opposite." I think that's a human fantasy we have here. I think I do the same thing sometimes. But it doesn't happen that often. That's why we have those images. But we should stop looking at discourse that way. What helps us to stay a bit more relaxed, as I said before, it's not always about what people say, but if and when they speak with each other. And there's a lot of support as well. People were asked last autumn, what do you think, how should Germany look like after the COVID pandemic? And the term that was mentioned most often was Germany should be more environmentally friendly. And as a second thing, Germany should be more just. And right at the bottom, so you can't see it on the slide, Germany should be more wealthier. So when you know that, then you see that people are actually in favor of climate protection. So you need to meet people where they are right now. So there is basically a good motivation there already, and you need to try to activate the people and take them with you. It's also important to listen to and understand your audience. I have a screenshot here that I took myself last autumn. I already mentioned it before. I don't know who knows surveys and the instrument of focus groups. It was originally developed by marketing people, and it is about creating small groups of 7 or 8 people in little discussion round tables of people who have similar opinions, and then you talk to this group that you can just choose quite randomly about how do they view a certain topic, what do they think about it, what do they know about it. And you can do it from a very scientific point of view. You can search for socioeconomic characteristics. What do they earn, for example? or you can just do it yourself. And I would really call upon you to do that if you're planning an information campaign or anything concerning public communication. Because otherwise you would do the campaign as you think about a certain topic. But you will realize if you invite a focus group, then people say completely different things or things that you didn't even think about. So I, for example, learned not only that many people think that plastic is a really big problem, but I was also positively surprised to hear that a lot of people are really awake and are really connected to nature and perceive nature and what's happening to it. So do it, it's really easy. And once you've done it, you wouldn't want to miss it. That leads me to something that's really closely connected to it. And that's number 5, test your messages. And here I brought a result of a training we did with a group of people who were invited by the Konrad Adenauer Foundation, which is close to the CDU party in Germany. So those people are closer to the values of the CDU rather than the left party, for example. And we wanted to ask them what climate protection narratives they like. And narratives are there to explain a certain topic, in this case, climate protection, and they put it into context. And we tested a few narratives, and one of the narratives was called Home, and it started, we love our home, our cities and villages, our culture, our landscapes, our forests. But all of this is threatened by climate change, and so on. You can see it on the slide. And then we asked the focus groups within the narratives to highlight what they really like about the narratives, that's highlighted in green, and what they don't like. And the interesting aspect is that we have green and red distributed quite differently in those two groups. So it seems to be that for some people, a term like working hard doesn't sound right to them, but for others it might be more neutral. And that's why it is so important to test one's messages. Because if there are too many red words in your messages, then it is just like with a soup with too much salt. You might have great ingredients, but the whole soup won't taste right. And then communication won't work. Now we've reached halftime. 5 out of 10 theses. And I'll have a look at the invisible team of moderators. And I'll ask again, are there any more questions? There was one question, but maybe we'll ask him later because it's really long. It's about trusting people more. And the question says that politics show us right now that we can't really trust it. So how do you deal with that? Because we say that we trust that politicians are on the same side as we are, then that doesn't seem to work at the moment. Yeah, that's a good point. That wasn't a call for naivety. on my part. And of course, policy is led by interests, and those interest groups are often very well organized, especially if there's a lot at risk. And those who think that might lose are stronger often, have a stronger opinion. So I believe there's no reason for blind optimism at the moment. But still, when you talk to representatives, policymakers, it is really helpful to ask yourselves, what are the things that could motivate this person in a positive way to commit themselves to climate protection? Where are connections? How can I reach that person? Who can reach that person? Which ambassador, so to speak? And I'm fully convinced that for most of the politicians, we are not dealing with people who are led by lobbyism, but people who say that they're convinced of their ideas of a good life, which might not be the same as everyone else, but there are still connections there or things that are similar. And I think that from a climate protection point of view, of course, there are people in the parliament who are not doing the right thing in from our point of view, but they are still convinced that they're doing they think they're doing the right thing. Yeah, so that's always a bit tricky. In the chat, a discussion has started about the seemingly unimportant topics like plastic avoidance, whether they shouldn't be as loud as they are right now. So how we should deal with that. Yeah, that's a really interesting topic. I think it's a huge chance. I think that's, so to speak, the great thing about plastic, that it's everywhere. Doesn't matter if it's plastic or waste in general. It's like an entry point for the discussion about our environment, about the use of resources, because we can see it and it's around us every day. And we often have to take our waste to the trash, and yeah, we just see it every day. So that's a good starting point for a conversation, and we should use that. That's why initiatives that are dealing with waste reduction are really important. And people who deal with it more intensively, they can keep pushing to come to the big topics. But it's important that we're trying to have a feeling or a few rules to assess which individual measures and also which policy measures are effective for climate protection and which are most important. That's not a plaidoyer against the speed limit, for example. That's not what I'm saying. But you still need to know what is most effective and what is urgent.
Is there anything else, or should we continue? You can continue, okay. Well, communication consists of many different words and terms, so it's important you pay attention to your words. And this is an overview that I put together. It's of course not extensive, but we should look at the words we use. For example, there's climate change. More fitting would be global warming or heating or climate crisis. It's a very problematic complex, and that has to do with the climate goals, in my view. On there are other words like minus 55% greenhouse gas reduction and decarbonization, which are all problematic because they're technocratic, they're abstract, they're expert talk, and they scare people away because they build up a lot of distance between people. You can't even imagine how much. Because they suggest that I know something, and many people who hear this, they think I know nothing, and that feels bad. And it makes a bad feeling inside of them. And they also, they don't say the right thing. It's not about reaching minus 55%, it's about getting to zero, that we do not use coal, oil, and gas at all. And if we talk about this, we really have to use the right words. And we should also talk about what we win by doing this. We are not doing climate protection for climate protection's sake. We will have cleaner and more livable cities, safer cities. And what I also think is interesting is the framing connected to climate goals, who are supposed to be made stronger or more strict, and those are always messages that suggest that there's that that's a bad thing and that it's a burden. But maybe we should do more ambitious climate work. And also there's the debate about sacrifice. Do we have to sacrifice meat or stop eating meat? Now it's about having a more healthy, balanced diet. And then there's the big complex of carbon neutrality, greenhouse gases, climate neutrality. And I linked to this on this slide, and we have a glossary on our website about that, because it's important that you know what you are talking about when you talk about this. And now the maybe a bit more political part of my talk. The next two theses are about that we want change, change by climate policy, and how do we do that? How do we achieve that? What's important there? And I would say no social change begins with a majority. I think we have to distance ourselves from the way of thinking that we need a big majority to be able to achieve something, to change things. I think that if we have 20%, if we reach 20%, that's enough. That's enough power to reach big transformations. And that's also what we can see when we look back on our history. That was the same case when it was about women's votes at the beginning of the 20th century. That wasn't something that the majority wanted, but it still happened. It was the same thing with same-sex marriage. That also wasn't wanted by the majority. And this ad that you can see down here from the 70s wouldn't be done the same today. It's about seatbelts. It was the same case with smoking ban in public spaces. And it was also the same case with the death penalty. There was no majority in any country on this world who was against the death penalty, but still it was abolished in most countries. And so it's about having stakeholders who push this, who push your cause. And so it's important that we do not say, like the German news here, the Tagesschau, that we say only 1 in 3 is in favor, but that we say already 1 in 3 is in favor for a carbon tax. It's all a question of perspective. And when we talk about climate change, climate protection, it's a lot about our ideas of the future. What we want to achieve until 2030, 40, 50, what we have to do so that we can so that we won't have dramatic developments in the future. When we talk about the future, it's important to look at how successful change processes have worked in the past. And when it comes to energy and environmental policy, we have a lot of experience of that in Germany. People who are still living today. There were a lot of big things happening, and there were political conflicts, like the conflict of nuclear waste, and that's something we left behind us. And what does that say for our movement today? Or if we look at it even further, there's pictures of Beate Glasfeld, a woman, an activist, you would say nowadays, who fought for the who fought for Germans talking about their Nazi past, and she slapped the former Chancellor Kurt-Georg Kiesinger because he was a member of the Nazi Party. And the slap was very important because it was a moral tipping point. It showed that it wasn't okay in our society anymore that when you were a member of this Nazi party that you're still active in politics. So this slap was very important that Beate Glasfeld made. And you can ask yourselves, like we did 2 weeks ago, like we saw 2 weeks ago, that the biggest court in Germany, for example, has a new evaluation of what freedom means, and that they had made a revolutionary sentence. That's also a moral tipping point for me. And what can we do to get close to these tipping points? And I think it's important how we talk about these changes. And we have the debate of sacrifice. So this is an example of things that have changed that used to be modern or chic. For example, here in the in North Rhine-Westphalia, where you can see modern communication or a lively city center, or what used to be healthy food used to be considered as it. And people, if you had said to them, you have to get away from that, they maybe would have not wanted to, but it just happened, and nowadays it seems old-fashioned. These pictures seem rather obscene today. So you can reach these tipping points very well. And now there are 2 theses left. So because in 10 minutes we want to have time to discuss. So I'll say, don't be afraid of morals. Talk about values and norms and about what moves you. And you can say this even more pointedly. I think today maybe we have a younger audience, but I assume that you are younger and you maybe don't have children yet. But you can imagine if people have children, that these children are holy to them. But you don't have to have children to have a value that's holy or sacred to you. And this is an image by social psychologist Shalom Schwartz. And this is about values. And those are very universal. They are all sorted into groups. On the upper right corner, which is the climate protection corner for me, there are values like the big picture, tolerance, unity with nature, a world of peace, social justice. That's something that many people would agree to here. That's something I like, and this is a value that I share. I want a world and a society in which these values are valid. And on the other side, we have the performance corner. influence, success, ambition, performance. That sounds a little bit more harsh than the part up there, but there are people who value these things. And of course, ambition is important, and success, if you have it, is also nice and important. And it's great if you are successful in something you're passionate about. But the question is if we only want to emphasize the upper part, which is connected to climate protection, or is there a way that we can work with people who think that performance is important to them, or that traditions are respected, or self-determination, or that authorities should be recognized? What's the way to reach people who value these things? I think there are ways, but most of the time it's not really spelled out yet. And maybe for people who are situated in this corner of self-determination and performance, maybe it feels to them like climate change is a threat to their values and what's important to them. I think there's a lot of work to do there. And if you look at those debates about value, and if you want to have some orientation, but maybe I will skip this slide to save time. And then I will talk about norms. That's different from values because norms describe what should be happening in a society or what is already happening in a society, and there's a serious difference there. And here you can differentiate between injunctive norms, which describe how things should be, good, bad, right, wrong. One example for our topic would be, for environmental reasons, one should ride a bicycle. And then, and this is very important, there are descriptive norms, which describe what the social norm is, which describe reality. And when we say 50% of Germans ride their bicycles to work, that's also just a fact, but it's also a norm that is included in there. And people use that for orientation because people orient what they do on social norms. They look at what other people do, and so they decide what's important to them based on these norms. And what's problematic is that people avoid situations like we can see on this image here. Maybe you have the image in your head that you should ride your bike, and that's good and important and fits what you think. But the reality is that the norm looks different. She feels endangered and threatened, and she sees that most other people are not riding their bikes, that she's alone. And that's bad because the woman feels bad, and she tends to avoid situations like that. And environmental policy and climate policy needs to avoid that people get into these situations. Last thesis speaks about success and about where you want to go. You should speak about your success and about where you want to go, and you should invite others to join you. And I think that's what's happening here too, and I think that's great, and it's a good strategy. And now this is a nice image for you. It's an illustration of the now no longer operating airport in Berlin, Tegel. It was redesigned on this image as an urban tech republic. You don't have to like this image. But what's important is that we talk about what we think is great and what we think the world should look like. So that's all from me, the 10 theses. If you want to stay tuned, if you're interested in this, I can recommend our newsletter to you. We're also having a congress every other year about climate communication, and the next one will be taking place in Switzerland in 2022. And if you really want to get into the topic, we have the Handbook of Climate Communication on our website, and it's being published chapter by chapter on our website. And this is what the first chapter looks like. And you can find a lot of what I said in more detail in there. There are exercises in there because it's important that you learn this practical side as well. So now I am at the end of my talk. I'm looking forward to your questions, to a discussion, and everything that we will talk about. Yeah, thank you. That was very interesting. And I think that the image of a future vision of the airport in Berlin was fascinating and it was very nice. And I think there are many questions. Yeah, for one part, there was a discussion about the term crisis because the crisis term might scare people off, but that it also people reference the book The New Climate War that also used the term climate crisis, and that a crisis could be seen as an opportunity. This is one of the big questions actually that we are talking about very intensely, and I think there's not one simple answer to this question. 2 points from me. I think it's important that politicians and society that they treat global warming as a crisis and treat it systematically and the way it's supposed to be treated. And on the other hand, and there's a psychological and a communicative component, many people think that the term crisis is something that urges them, that it's like a coercion to them, that they are being forced to do something. It's a negative image for them, and that these images are alarmist, and this might lead to people being react that they don't want to do anything at all now, and that's different depending on the social group you're in and also depending on your character. But you can say that a drastic image of climate scenario can always be wrong, but you can also say that it's always right. So it's very depending on who you are talking to and what these people have experienced and how they dealt with crisis in society. There are people who have the feeling that they are in the mode of control and that when you enter a crisis, they are really shocked. So this point again that I said earlier, you have to test out your messages and how they are received.
There was another question on testing your messages. You've already mentioned those focus groups, and I think that's really fascinating. And there was a question, are there more ideas how to test your messages? Because a focus group is from a scientific point of view, and I think from our perspective as activists, it's a different thing to talk to different groups. Do you have a tip for that? I can just say what we did when we wrote the handbook I just talked about. We had this trivial problem that we couldn't come up with a title. So we thought, let's do what we always preach. Let's invite 8 people from different backgrounds of climate protection. They're all activists, and we talked to them and presented our concept to them. And this led us to change the concept completely. So what I want to say with this is that you can forget the scientific side if you want to. It's not really necessary, because you can also use less effort and get good results as well. And a focus group can also be the boyfriend of your sister, neighbors, a colleague, other people that you just invite to your home when you're all tested, of course, or via Zoom. There's another question. It's a really big question again. How can the culture of our society be changed in the most effective way? Well, if I only knew that. So for many questions, the answer lies within the question. So it's basically important to ask questions, because it's part of good communication. Because who asks questions leads. I think in this concept of culture, there's a lot involved. On the one hand, culture is something dealing with literature, theater, and things like that. There are a lot of answers there and things that could liberate us. For example, I read the book The Ministry for the Future recently by the author Kim Stanley Robinson. And I've never read a science fiction book before because I don't really like this genre. But I was really fascinated because this book shows a reality that could be possible. It shows something that is something that I wish for, but it's not really realistic. And that's something that defines culture, I think, that we break out of our own limits. Another example, in ancient times, people could describe things differently, and it got lost in the Middle Ages, but it came back later in the Renaissance. So how can that be? How can people lose an ability and then relearn it again? And that has something to do with culture and questions of our that leave our daily life. This answer might be a bit fragmented, but yeah, that's what I have to say about that. I have another question. You've said that for people who share different values, have a different culture, we need new ways to reach them and to get them on our side of climate protection. But at the beginning, you said that there's a problem that people have different values and that values always win over facts. So how could this way look like? I know that there's not a patent solution, but do you have to be really open and understand where is the other person? Because facts don't get you there. Yeah, if you only use facts, then you won't get anywhere. And if you only see like, okay, my communication partner doesn't know anything and I need to help him or her, so that doesn't work. And it's not the case that all people adapt facts to their belief systems and have their own view of the world. There are always tendencies there. And it's really complex. It's not only about facts and not only about values. There are also emotions, experiences, your character, the context you're living in, your social reality. all of these factors also have an important role to play. And you need to address all of those a little bit to change something. What I think is that people who deal with climate protection completely different than me, for example, they should feel good with this topic, and they should be able to think that this is their version of a good world and it's not a threat. George Marshall, an important figure of climate communication in the UK, he said that we can do successful climate protection if we talk with people in a way that we don't really like. So think of your biggest political opponent that you wouldn't ever vote for, and you talk to those people, and then you've reached something to get results. We have a lot of more questions on YouTube. There were questions like, are there any studies already? How you can reach those 20% for the climate movement? And also, how do you deal with asking people to pay bigger taxes, for example, for carbon, but not companies? Okay, so 20% is not a problem because we've already reached that goal. But I would just say you shouldn't just look at getting the majority, because I think that's only, yeah, we've already reached those 20%. And when we talk about big countries that need to do something, and Germany is not that big, and we have a fact check on our website, klimafakten.de. And I'll have a quick look at the website so I can tell you the number. That's the fact check number 6.1. So we have legal, philosophical, logical, moral, economic arguments why it's not right to say that the German emissions are really low, because that's not true. They are not low. And if I would say that I don't want any fatalities in traffic, and I do something at one interjunction, and there's one less people, one less person dying, you still invest in road infrastructure to make it more safe for everyone. And the social argument, there are different elements to that. It's really good to have good facts to counter this. We have a lot of people who suffer from climate change today already. So exhaust gas are not only problems, or mainly not problems from people who live in rich areas, but people who live right next to big interjunctions. And we need better social policy so that wealth is distributed more evenly. And it's really possible that climate policy is possible for everyone. So those who can contribute more need to contribute more, because mostly they also are mostly responsible for the damages. We've recently had a discussion about how fair it is if people with low income can't go on vacation, like Mallorca, for example. On Twitter, there's a person called Mattioli, who I really recommend. He collected data on how many percent of a society fly. In Germany, it's 1/3 of people. So 2/3 of people in Germany don't fly in a year. So that's something about social justice. So our time's almost up. So I would like to thank you. It was really fascinating. And I think the most important thing is to trust each other more and to push the movement further. So thank you once again. And I hope you have a nice day, nice public climate school. Bye. Thank you.